Chapter 4. Karun pulled the mouse out by the snout, not liking the feel of it, and dropped it into the paper sack with its companions. Enough with the white mice, he decided. The mice die. They die if you put them through all the way, and they die if you put them through halfway head first. Put them through halfway butt first, they stay frisky. What the hell is in there? Sensory input, he thought almost randomly. When they go through, they see something, hear something, touch something. God, maybe even smell something. That literally kills them. What? He had no idea, but he meant to find out. Karun still almost had 40 minutes before Comlink pulled the database out from under him. He unscrewed the thermometer from the wall beside his kitchen door, trotted back to the barn with it, and put it through the portals. The thermometer went in at 83 degrees Fahrenheit. It came out at 83 degrees Fahrenheit. He rummaged through the spare room where he kept a few toys to amuse his grandchildren with. Among them he found a packet of balloons. He blew one up, tied it off, and battered it through the portal. It came out intact and unharmed. A start down the road toward answering his questions about a sudden change in pressure somehow caused by what he was already thinking of as the jaunting process. With 5 minutes to go before the witching hour, he ran into his house, snatched up his goldfish bowl. Inside, Percy and Patrick swished their tails and charted about in agitation and ran back with it. He shoved the goldfish bowl through the portal. He hurried across to Portal 2, where his goldfish bowl sat on the crate. Patrick was floating belly up. Percy swam slowly around near the bottom of the bowl, as if dazed. A moment later, he also floated belly up. Karun was reaching for the goldfish bowl when Percy gave a weak flick of his tail and resumed his lackadaisical swimming. Slowly, he seemed to throw off whatever the effect had been, and by the time Karun got back from Mosconi's veterinary clinic that night at 9 o'clock, Percy seemed as perky as ever. Patrick was dead. Karun fed Percy a double ration of fish food and gave Patrick a hero's burial in the garden. After the computer had cut him out for the day, Karun decided to hitch a ride over to Mosconi's. Accordingly, he was standing on the shoulder of Route 26 at 3:45 that afternoon, dressed in jeans and a loud plaid sports coat. His thumb out, a paper bag in his other hand. Finally, a kid driving a Chevette, not much bigger than a sardine can, pulled over, and Karun got in. "What you got in the bag, my man?" "Bunch of dead mice," Karun said. Eventually, another car stopped. When the farmer behind the wheel asked about the bag, Karun told him it was a couple of sandwiches. Mosconi dissected one of the mice on the spot and agreed to dissect the others later and call Karun on the telephone with the results. The initial result was not very encouraging. So far as Mosconi could tell, the mice he had opened up was perfectly healthy, except for the fact that it was dead. Depressing. Victor Karun was eccentric, but he was no fool, Mark said. The jaunt attendants were getting close now, and he supposed he had to hurry up, or he would be finishing this in the wake-up room in Whitehead City. Hitching a ride back home that night, and he had to walk almost all of the way, so the story goes, he realized that he had maybe solved a third of the energy crisis at one single stroke. All the goods that had to go by the train and truck and boat and plane before that day could be jaunted. You could write a letter to your friend in London or Rome or Senegal, and he could have it the very next day, without an ounce of oil needing to be burned. We take it for granted, but it was a big thing to Karun, believe me, and to everyone else as well. "But what happened to the mice, Daddy?" Rick asked. That's what Karun kept asking himself, Mark said, because he also realized that if people could use the jaunt, that would solve almost all of the energy crisis, and that we might be able to conquer space. In his Popular Mechanics article, he said that even the stars could finally be ours, and the metaphor he used was crossing a shallow stream without getting your shoes wet. You just get a big rock and throw it in the stream. Then get another rock, stand on the first rock, and throw that into the stream. Go back and get a third rock, go back, get to the second rock, throw that rock into the stream, and keep up like that until you'd made a path of stepping stones all the way across the stream. Or in this case, the solar system, or maybe even the galaxy. I don't get that at all, Patty said. That's because you got turkey turds for brains, Ricky said smugly. I do not, Daddy, Rick said. Children don't, Marilla said gently. Karoon pretty much foresaw what has happened, Mark said. Drone rocket ships programmed to land, first on the moon, then on Mars, then on Venus and the outer moons of Jupiter. Drones really only programmed to do one thing after they landed, set up a jaunt station for astronauts, Ricky said. Mark nodded. And now there are scientific outposts all over the solar system, and maybe someday, long after we're gone, there will even be another planet for us. There are jaunt ships on their way to 4 different star systems with solar systems of their own, but it'll be a long, long time before they get there. I want to know what happened to the mice, Patty said impatiently. Well, eventually the government got into it, Mark said. Karoon kept them out as long as he could, but finally they got wind of it and landed on him with both feet. Karoon was nominal head of the Jaunt project until he died 10 years later, but he was never really in charge of it again. Geez, the poor guy, Rick said. But he got to be a hero, Patricia said. He's in all the history books, just like President Lincoln and President Hart. I'm sure that's a great comfort to him, wherever he is, Mark thought, and then went on, carefully glossing over the rough parts. The government, which had been pushed to the wall by the escalating energy crisis, did indeed come in with both feet. They wanted the jaunt on a paying basis as soon as possible, like yesterday. Faced with economic chaos and the increasingly probable picture of anarchy and mass starvation in the 1990s, only last-ditch pleading made them put off announcement of the jaunt before an exhaustive spectrographic analysis of jaunted articles could be completed. When the analyses were complete and showed no changes in the makeup of jaunted artifacts, the existence of the jaunt was announced with international hoopla. Showing intelligence for once, necessity is, after all, the mother of invention, the US government put Young and Rubicam in charge of the PR. That was where the myth-making around Victor Karoon, an elderly, rather peculiar man who showered perhaps twice a week and changed his clothes only when he thought of it, began. Young and Rubicam and the agencies which followed them turned Karoon into a combination of Thomas Edison, Eli Whitney, Pecos Bill, and Flash Gordon. The blackly funny part of this all, and Mark Otez did not pass this on to his family, was that Victor Karoon might even then have been dead or insane. Art imitates life, they say, and Karoon would have been familiar with the Robert Heinlein novel about the doubles who stand in for figures in the public eye. Victor Karoon was a problem, a nagging problem that wouldn't go away. He was a loud-mouthed foot-dragger, a holdover from ecological 60s, a time when there was still enough energy floating around to allow foot-dragging as a luxury. These, on the other hand, were the nasty 80s, with cold clouds befouling the sky, and a long section of the California coastline expected to be uninhabitable for perhaps 60 years due to a nuclear excursion. Victor Karoon remained a problem until about 1991, and then he became a rubber stamp, smiling, quiet, grandfatherly, a figure seen waving from podiums in news films. In 1993, 3 years before he officially died, he rode in the pace car at the Tournament of Roses parade, puzzling and a little ominous. The results of the announcements of the jaunt of working teleportation on October 19, 1988, was a hammerstroke of worldwide excitement and economic upheaval. On the world money markets, the battered old American dollar suddenly skyrocketed through the roof. People who had bought gold at $806 an ounce suddenly found that a pound of gold would bring something less than $1,200. In the year between the announcement of the Jaunt and the first working Jaunt station in New York and LA, the stock market climbed a little over 1,000 points. The price of oil dropped only 70 cents a barrel, but by 1994, with Jaunt stations crisscrossing the US at the pressure points of 70 major cities, OPEC had ceased to exist, and the price of oil began to tumble. By 1991, with stations in most free world cities and goods routinely jaunted between Tokyo and Paris, Paris and London, London and New York, New York and Berlin, oil had dropped to $14 a barrel. By 2006, when people last began to use the Jaunt on a regular basis, the stock market had leveled off 5,000 points above its 1987 levels. Oil was selling for $6 a barrel. The oil companies had begun to change their names. Texaco became Texaco Oil/Water, and Mobil had become Mobil Hydro 20X. By 2045, water prospecting became the big game, and oil became what it had been in 1906, a toy.